Hi, my name is Alyssa Adams, and in this presentation, I will be reviewing a research article titled "The Effects of Multimedia Enhanced Instruction on the Vocabulary of English Language Learners and Non-English Language Learners in Pre-Kindergarten through Second Grade." The authors of this article are Rebecca Silverman from the University of Maryland and Sarah Hines from Hunter College in the City University of New York. This article is located in the Journal of Educational Psychology, which is published by the American Psychological Association. The original article was submitted in February of 2008, revised and resubmitted on June 16th of 2008, and accepted by the American Psychological Association in August of 2008. The study is considered empirical simply because it's an assessment of students' skills acquired after a 12-week period. This research was also conducted with both native English speakers and English language learners. At the beginning of the article, the authors touch on how many students, especially those who are English language learners who struggle with vocabulary acquisition, often struggle when they are interacting with content and have a hard time accessing the information available within text that they're expected to learn from. The authors note one specific technique that has shown promise to improve vocabulary acquisition is the use of multimedia as an audiovisual reinforcer. Silverman and Hines also talk about previous research and how multimedia is used in the home, where children watched educational programs such as Sesame Street and Between the Lions. The research questions in this article are as follows. What is the effect of a multimedia-enhanced read-aloud vocabulary intervention as compared with a read-aloud vocabulary intervention that does not include multimedia enhancement on early elementary school-age children's knowledge of words targeted in the intervention, general vocabulary knowledge, and knowledge of the content introduced in the intervention, as well as how this affects children depending on their language background, i.e. whether the children are native English speakers or not. And both of these are pulled directly from the text. This study was conducted in a northeastern semi-urban public school. There were a total of 85 student participants across 4 grade levels. There were 2 pre-kindergarten classrooms, 2 kindergarten classrooms, 2 first grade classrooms, and 1 second grade classroom. In the study, there were slightly more male students than female students, and the average range of students was from age 4.5 to age 8.5. The student demographics included 48% African American, 20% white, 20% Asian, 7% Hispanic, and 5% that were classified as, quote, other. 55% of this entire population received free or reduced lunch, which was used as an indicator of socioeconomic status. Both native English speakers and English language learners were a part of the study. 68% of the students spoke English as their primary language and were considered non-ELL, whereas 32% of the students spoke languages other than English as their primary language. 33% of these students were African American, 3% were white, 52% were Asian, and 11% were Hispanic. The primary languages that these students spoke include Haitian Creole, Portuguese, Mandarin, and Spanish. A total of 8 teachers participated in this study, 1 in each classroom, in addition to 1 resource teacher in the second grade classroom. In the implementation, it was conducted with 2 different methods, either a non-multimedia or a multimedia. The teachers were given scripted intervention lessons. The intervention lessons consisted of habitats, one for each cycle, being rainforests, savannas, coral reefs, and deserts. They had both narrative and informative tests. These books were chosen based on the relevancy to the habitat in the cycle, and they were required to be reasonably challenging for the students to read while still having access to the text, and were interesting enough to keep the attention of the children. 8 words per book that were selected as, quote, target vocabulary, as well as 4 words as overriding themes that were addressed throughout the entire 12-week period. In the multimedia section, 1 clip was chosen for each habitat that corresponded to the equivalent 3-week cycle. Both before and after the 12-week intervention, students were assessed on their knowledge of the target words. This particular assessment was based on a measure used in the Beck and McCohen, in which students were answering 4 yes or no questions. One example is, does habitat mean a place where an animal lives? For general vocabulary, the Peabody picture vocabulary test was used to assess that. Students were to choose an image that correctly corresponded with the word that the administrator of the assessment gives. And finally, the science concepts. These concepts were taught throughout the intervention and were assessed via research-designed assessments in which the students are asked to answer 2 open-ended questions where points are given based on independently produced accurate statements. As far as the results for the targeted vocabulary assessment, students whose native language was English, the difference between the pre-test and the post-test for both the multimedia and the non-media resulted in a gain of around 10 points. In contrast, for students who were English language learners, the difference between post-test and pre-test was approximately 11% for the non-media section and 17 points for those in the multimedia group. For general vocabulary, students who are native English speakers showed a difference between pre-test and post-test in the multimedia group as approximately 11 points, and the non-multimedia group is approximately 11 points. For students who are considered English language learners, the difference between post-test was approximately 11 points in the non-media and 23 in the media group. Finally, the research design science assessments. For students whose native language is English, there was a difference between test and post-test. For the multimedia group was approximately 7.5 points, and the non-multimedia group was approximately 7 points. For students who are English language learners, the difference between post-test and pre-test was approximately 6 points in the non-multimedia and 9 points in the multimedia. As far as implication goes, using the multimedia tools, it gives ELL students nonverbal tools that are needed to catch up with their native English-speaking peers, and also allow those students to interact with grade level content. Multimedia can also be used as an intervention for English language learners while still attending to and avoiding the hindrance to educational needs of native English speakers in the classroom. Some limitations to that: there is still additional instruction that is needed to support English language learners in order to improve the vocabulary skills, in addition to using the multimedia tools as a way to include in the environment. And the assessments are targeted vocabulary and science concept rely heavily on the students' abilities to respond to linguistic type questions in English. And this, in turn, could have led to skewed results in those assessments if a student's comprehension of English was at a level 1 or emerging stage in development. Overall, I feel that this article and the study itself did a really good job at taking what was already in place and building upon foundations. Some of the strengths in this aspect includes the fact that the authors decided to conduct a study on vocabulary acquisition in a content-related activity rather than on its own. Selleck mentions this several times in her text, where in specific, when you're discussing the explicit instruction of vocabulary content, the first step is to describe or explain the new vocabulary, which was discussed in the article, and making sure that you're using your student's background or foundational knowledge on the topic. By focusing on how to improve vocabulary acquisition in a specific content area, the students are interacting with both general and specific content vocabulary and that is useful in academic settings such as conversations with peers and in writing. When you consider the results of the linguist acquisition of EEL students using multimedia as a tool, teachers can take this into account by including it and using other technological tools to support learning of English in the classroom. As stated in the strategies test, the use and proficiency of technology in the classroom is not the goal, but rather a means to infuse the technology as a tool to support students' learning by providing other ways to gather and interpret information. The interventions in this study could have also been classified as read aloud plus, where specific vocabulary words or content-specific phrases are looked at in more detail during a read aloud. In this case, the multimedia tool was used as a way to revisit those vocabulary and discuss them in more depth. One element that I felt was a little bit lacking was the fact that the intervention lesson plan was missing from the final article. I feel that considering the absence of at least one example hinders my personal ability to be able to take what has been studied and apply it directly used in the lessons so that I can interpret it and use it in my own classroom with ELL students. Personally, I think that this article is very interesting, and considering that prior to the study being conducted, there wasn't much research in regard to the connection to multimedia tools and students that are learning English. It also makes me wonder how these tools can be scaffolded instruction with students with special needs, such as specific learning disabilities. I know that not all students are going to be the same, but if we can find tools to make sure that the content we are teaching is available to the majority of our students without severely disadvantaging them, I think that it's important to do so.